Paris on Politics from Fox 32 Chicago.
This is not about fighting crime. This is about Donald Trump searching for any justification to deploy the military in a blue city, in a blue state, to try and intimidate his political rivals.
All right, let's set the scene here. Dozens of city, county, and state elected officials unify today in their message to President Trump. Keep the military away from the city of Chicago. Now, the officials were led by Governor Pritzker. They gathered downtown on the banks of the Chicago River to make several points. One, by federal law, the governor has to request the National Guard unless there's an emergency national situation like an insurrection. Two, though crime is always a persistent problem in Chicago, there is no emergency situation that would warrant the president's intervention. Three, according to FBI data, Chicago's murder rate per capita didn't even crack the top 20 of big cities last year, and many red state cities with Republican governors fared worse. And four, if public safety is truly the president's concern, then he would pick up the phone and try to coordinate the Department of Defense response.
Well, strangely, the president seems afraid of me and won't call. So I have not heard from the president, haven't heard from Secretary Hegseth, haven't heard from anybody from the administration about what their plans are. We only read about it in the Washington Post and understand that they have some plan that they've been putting together. So we're making sure that we're prepared, that we're ready to go to court, and that we're pushing back on the narrative that he has that somehow there is a problem in the city of Chicago that is worse than other cities across the country.
For you architecture buffs, he is right outside the first two floors of the Trump Tower there on a riverboat. Now, today's press event certainly had one goal in mind, a show of force to President Trump that he is up against a massive hurdle if he wants to exert his will in Chicago. And could that show of force actually have an impact? Today, in a far-reaching Q&A in the Oval Office, Trump appeared to back off his threats and to follow federal law. And then he kind of backed off of that.
I didn't get a request from the governor of Illinois, who is affected maybe more than anybody else, right? And I think until I get that request from that guy, I'm not going to do anything about it. We may wait. We may or may not. We may just go in and do it, which is probably what we should do. The problem is, it's not nice when you go in and do it and somebody else is standing there saying, as we give great results, say, we don't want the military. They need help badly. Chicago desperately needs help.
Confusing, so we'll wait and see what the president wants to do there, but it does seem like he is backing off those threats. Now, local Republican elected officials, they say Democrats have failed on crime and a federal intervention is needed. Meanwhile, community activists who had been opposed to Trump, Jedediah Brown, surveyed today's event and said he's not convinced either side has it right.
Why isn't this press conference on the south and the west side of Chicago where the violence is at? If it's down, it should be safe to do it there. The fear-mongering, I do not appreciate. And I think that all of the elected officials on both sides of the aisle need to humble themselves and actually do what's best in the interest of the American people. And if that means a coordinated effort with the National Guard, so be it.
People, of course, feel passionately on either side of the issue. I wouldn't open X or Twitter right now, but there is that whole issue of federal law. It does give the president some extreme conditions where he might be able to federalize the Guard, as explained by former Chicago Inspector General and National Security Law Professor Joe Ferguson.
What exceptions might exist right now, but in the first instance, to simply send in or attempt to federalize National Guard or to send in the military for law enforcement purposes in the first instance, it is unlawful. It's unconstitutional.
So Ferguson saying the president would have to do something like declare the Insurrection Act or a foreign invasion. Now, the Washington Post reports that the deployment could happen in September, but for now, it's a war of words and optics. Supporters of the president will highlight the many incidents of crime that occur on a daily basis here. Opponents will talk about the falling rate of crime. It is down by a third, and warn about an authoritarian overreach. Television and social media shape people's opinions these days and certainly shape the political reaction. So stay tuned.
Coming up on Paris on Politics.
Tonight, Trump versus Chicago. Local officials push back on the president's plan to send the National Guard here. The other major union that represents CPS workers speaks out ahead of this week's school budget vote. They're not happy with the Chicago Teachers Union. Sports radio mainstay Dan Bernstein is back on the air after controversial social media posts ended his career at the Score. He opens up about what happened.
This is Paris on Politics from Fox 32 Chicago.
Welcome to Paris on Politics. We'll hear, won't he? The president addressed his threats to send the National Guard to Chicago multiple times today, but offered little clarity on what the plans actually are and whether he'll follow through without the consent of the governor. At today's large press conference we just saw, I caught up with senior U.S. Senator Dick Durbin to see what elected Democrats are planning to do.
Senator, is there pretext here to sue preemptively to block any kind of deployment given what the president has said and given the reporting?
Listen, Kwame was asked a similar question, Kwame Raoul, the state attorney general, and he basically said it's too early to make that decision. I think he's right. You got to be careful what you telegraph as your next move. It'll precipitate some action on the other side. So let's wait and see. This morning, President Trump started backing off of the Chicago invasion idea. Maybe by the end of the day, he'll be on something else. He changes his mind pretty frequently.
You know, as a member of the Judiciary Committee, are you aware of any of these plans? Have you been communicated with from DOD or the White House?
Came out in the Washington Post, and I believe it was Saturday. And it was the first time that they've been organizing these ideas for a long time. You know, it just goes right down to the bottom line. The legal authority for a president to federalize troops is an emergency situation, insurrection, an invasion, whatever, something like that. Well, this kind of thing was in the works for a long time. Hard to argue that an emergency was created over a long period of time.
Would you expect he would invoke something like the Insurrection Act, invasion or rebellion?
I don't know where he will turn, but he's going to have his hands full. I think the law is very limiting any president from taking over local law enforcement responsibilities. Someone mentioned the situation in Little Rock, Arkansas. I remember that, Central High School. The Arkansas law enforcement authorities would not follow the Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court decision, and as a consequence, the troops were federalized. That's a rare occurrence. That goes back, 60 years? It's that infrequent. So the president's trying to make this a pretty common occurrence. I think that's a serious mistake.
We know the president, Chicago's had a crime problem. We know that crime has dropped in Chicago and other big cities. He is coming after blue cities. And you made the point that there are red state cities that have similar problems.
The governor, and they talked about Memphis, Tennessee. It's always high on the list, I'm sorry to say. It's a great town, but that's the reality. Same thing's true in Mississippi. I mean, you can go around the country and find graphic examples of more violence per capita than the city of Chicago. But because they are in red states, Republican states, the president never mentions it. I mean, this is pure political theater, and that really demonstrates it.
Speaking of what the president did today, other executive orders, under the law, does he have the ability to withhold funding from Illinois based on the Safety Act, based on cashless bail?
No, there's been a real test, and the whole question of sanctuary laws, and he lost. You know, you can't punish a community for what they can legally do in their own laws and then say, we'll deny them federal funds. They lost in court on that particular question.
The Republicans will say Democrats aren't serious about fighting crime. They are resisting this, and they're resisting help. What's your answer to them?
32%. That's how much violent crime has gone down in the city of Chicago in 1 year. That's an indication of a lot of hard work. Okay?
Thank you, Senator.
And we will continue to follow this in the days and weeks ahead. But we're back after this with the other big standoff in Chicago, the Chicago Public Schools budget, right after this.